Superstar trades and trade requests are a foundational part of being a fan of the modern NBA. It's arguably the biggest part of the sport. However, former players and a lot of analysts have a big issue with all these trades and all these trade requests and trying to figure out what the solution is constantly to what they see is a problem. But you know what? This actually isn't a problem. Like, yes, Kevin Durant switching teams again feels a little bit weird. Kyrie Irving going from committed to the Nets to a week later requesting a trade and ultimately ending up in Dallas, and all these other superstar trades that we see. It might feel a little bit weird, but arguably it's the best thing that the league has going for it. There's a couple of different reasons for this. For me, first and foremost, it is the most interesting thing about the league overall. The NBA can change in an instant. All this player movement, these trade requests, these superstar trades, teams, angling to acquire stars and superstars because it's a stars-driven league, is one of the things that makes a league so intriguing and makes it such a year-round sport. It has been a goal of Adam Silver and of the league for the last couple of seasons to make this a year-round league. You never know what could happen on any given day in the NBA, especially when it comes to player movement, trades, and free agency, and they have certainly accomplished that. And even though it might feel like it's gone a little bit overboard when you have all NBA caliber players, 2 or 3 guys changing teams every single year, that might feel like it's gone a little bit too far, and maybe they'll try and reel that in with the next CBA. You might be right, but I would argue that if you ask the league office, if you asked Adam Silver, hey, would you rather go back to the way things used to be or keep things the way that they are in terms of player movement, in terms of trades, I think the league itself absolutely would keep things the way that they are, and I think the players would as well. The only group that I would argue that disagrees with this are the owners, and the owners are the ones that are going to try and reel this back in because they want, when they sign a player like Kevin Durant to a 4-year extension, they want that to mean that Kevin Durant is going to honor the 4-year contract that he signed. It used to be that trade requests revolved around free agency, and the way that you could really leverage your situation into a successful trade request was when you had a year left on your contract or 2 years left on your contract, and like James Harden did to Brooklyn when he ended up in Philadelphia, threatened leaving in the offseason in exchange for nothing. Same thing with Kyrie Irving during this season, as well as many other guys in the past, Anthony Davis. But there's been a couple of turning points here. One, to me, is the Paul George trade going to the Clippers. Obviously, Oklahoma City got a ton in exchange for him, but he had just signed an extension and re-signed with that team, and the Clippers were still able to make that move happen. And then, of course, the Ben Simmons situation was a turning point as well. He just refused to play. He was on a multi-year contract, and it has now led to Kevin Durant as well, with 3-4 years left on his contract, requesting a trade and ending up elsewhere. Things have changed and evolved, but I would argue that it's been good for the league. And beyond just the interest in the league as a whole, which I think the league office really appreciates and really likes, this helps the teams as well, because it used to be that a player like LeBron would just leave in free agency for nothing. The team that was losing the guy would lose him for nothing, and then the team acquiring that player wouldn't have to give up assets, and it would create these crazy super teams. Whereas now, those things are balanced out. The guys that are getting traded away and request a trade, you're still getting a ton of value in exchange for them. Like, you can look at Brooklyn, you can look at Oklahoma City, you can look at a variety of different teams that have traded away big time star players. They've set themselves up for future success. Some of the teams that have some of the brightest futures in the league right now are teams like the Clippers and like the Pelicans, that, yes, in the Pelicans case, they got lottery luck, but even without that, they have so many assets. They have so many young players. They have such a bright future because rather than leaving in free agency, Anthony Davis told them a year and a half ahead of time, I'm not coming back. Trade me, preferably, to this destination. Same thing with the Clippers, with the Thunder. Paul George just requested a trade. He was like, nah, I don't want to be here anymore. And all of a sudden, he's in LA, and they get so much stuff back in exchange for him. And it helps the contenders that want to push towards a championship. But more importantly, it helps these teams that are trading away stars. You're not just losing, in the Thunder's case, Russell Westbrook and Paul George for nothing. You're getting back a ton of value in exchange for these guys. And it creates a really interesting, comparison between these teams at the top of the league, teams like the Clippers, teams like the Lakers that invest so much in trying to be top tier contenders. There's nothing sustainable about it. They're trading away all these future firsts. They're trying to get their stars because they know that they don't really need those draft picks. Whereas in contrast, you have teams like the Thunder. They're these small market teams. They know that they need to build their teams in a smart and an intelligent way, and they need as many assets as they can to be able to make that happen. And they're building their team around the draft rather than these superstar trades like these other teams. And it benefits both teams. So not only is the interest there, but I would argue that trade requests in this era that we're now in, where free agency, apart from, Kyrie and KD signing, and of course the Clippers getting Kawhi, apart from that summer in 2019, free agency is not really how you acquire stars anymore. And I would argue that it's actually better balance for the league. One, it de-incentivizes tanking in terms of teams just shedding salary to have 2 max cap space slots, but also it makes it to where if you're losing a star, you're at least getting something in exchange. And so even though, yes, these players are constantly forcing themselves to situations that they want to be in, situations that benefit themselves, and that can appear on the surface to be a selfish thing. On the other hand, you could also view it as, hey, at least they're giving these teams a heads up and allowing them to get something in exchange. Think about, for example, when Paul George left Indiana, he told them, he was like, I'm not going to come back. Like, I appreciate everything that's happened here in Indiana. I appreciate my time here, but I'm going to leave. So your options here are let me leave for nothing or get something in exchange for me. And that puts the team in such a better situation. So even though the player movement aspect of this might be frustrating to some people that want a little bit more loyalty, even current players, active players, we've seen guys like Giannis make comments about, winning a championship the right way. And inarguably, winning a championship the way that Giannis did, staying with Milwaukee and ultimately winning that title, if you're able to do that, it means more than whatever Kevin Durant has done in terms of his championship seasons. It just does. Like, that's just a fact. But if you're gonna leave, you might as well give the team a heads up. And I do think that even if there's this, more elevated thought process in terms of what a championship could mean if you stay, if you're gonna leave, giving a team a heads up is probably the right thing to do. Now, that doesn't mean that things aren't gonna change. Because like I said, I think you could very easily argue that this has gone even past a line that the NBA would be comfortable with, and specifically the owners. The owners, even though, in some cases like the Clippers, it does allow them to get these star players, there are still plenty of times where I'm sure Brooklyn's looking around thinking, like, we traded for these guys, they committed to each other. Kyrie and KD asked me to go out and get James Harden, then he leaves, and then Kyrie requests a trade, and then KD requests a trade twice. Like, where's the level of commitment from these guys if we're committing to them as a franchise, paying them all these money? I do think that those are some conversations that are going to be had leading up this next CBA, figuring out how exactly can we make this work? Like, can we put a restriction on if you sign an extension with a team, like in Kevin Durant's case, you can't request a trade for the first year, the first 2 years. Like, you have to stay on that team, or, you lose half your salary or something. Like, they're going to put some stipulations into these contracts, or make the contracts even longer, whatever they can do to try and make sure that they do reel this in a little bit. I think the league likes it. I think if they could choose, they'd rather keep things the way that they are, but they do recognize that the owners need to be a part of this, and the owners need to be happy with the situation as well. And that if you're going to be paying, $4 billion plus for an NBA franchise, it would be pretty cool if you knew that the players had at least some level of responsibility to fulfill the multi-million-dollar contracts that you're signing them to. And so that, just from a business perspective, like, the league has to reel that in even as much as they like it, and the players like this amount of player movement. But I do think that it's an interesting perspective to have, to think less about this as a negative in terms of a lack of loyalty, and these guys are so temperamental and they're choosing new situations all the time, whereas they could just fake it and just wait until free agency and then leave for nothing. And we're going to see a lot of situations, I think, over the next couple seasons, teams like the Pelicans, teams like the Thunder, that you're going to look and say, one of the big reasons that they are where they are as championship contenders, I believe, over the next couple of seasons is because of the value they were able to get in exchange for those guys. And had they left for nothing, had they left as free agents, had, even in the Thunder's case, they continued to run it back as they had planned to, behind Russell Westbrook and behind Paul George, even in those cases, they would not have been as much better off as they are. And this kind of accelerated that process. And maybe we'll see a situation where teams like the Clippers and the Lakers are near the bottom of the league, and teams like the Thunder and the Pelicans are at the top, specifically because of how they view these star trades. And whereas in the past, those guys might have just left for nothing, now you're getting something back, and it's creating a little bit more balance in these smaller market teams in a way that you would have thought would have created a ton of imbalance for those smaller market teams. And to me, like, this is one of the interesting things about the league, is understanding all these different mechanisms and figuring out what the best balance is, what are changes you can make to try and constantly improve the league. And that's just such an interesting concept to me. I'm interested to see down in the comment section what you guys have to say in terms of what changes, what rules, what contract stipulations you would potentially implement, because I'm sure there are people watching this video that have had, players that they loved on their teams request a trade, or leave in free agency, or, sign a 4-year extension and then suddenly request a trade a year or two later. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say, because I'm sure you have some personal experience with some of these guys, what solutions you could possibly see to what I don't think is an issue, but I think a lot of people do.